this precious name, this Jesus at whose name we bow, falling prostrate at his feet. When was the last time you really fell prostrate at someone's feet? I don't mean the I've fallen and I can't get up. I mean to really humble yourself and be prostrate at someone's feet. A sign that someone else truly has authority over you. I think Jim, you've done that?
If somebody have to help me back up.
Yes, that's probably one reason why most of us do not get in that position. Getting back up is a little difficult. I probably would never have been in that position myself if not for a particular class that I took in seminary on prayer. And it's amazing how differently you pray depending on your prayer position. You assume a different attitude depending on whether you pray with arms uplifted or sitting with hands folded or lying prostrate. A friend in a covenant group actually had that as one of his accountability issues that he wanted us to be asking him about, was to keep holding him accountable for kneeling when he prayed, to physically kneel. He had some issues with pride and humility on his own, and recognizing that, he knew that he needed to physically assume a posture of humility, of acknowledging someone else's authority. A good friend told me this last week, that when he started his road to recovery, his sponsor in AA told him there's two things you need to know. One is there is a God. Two is you're not it. This question of humility and authority, this bowing before Jesus, is what this prayer posture of being prostrate is all about. And this reading today from Matthew's Gospel calls into mind questions of authority and humility, just like Paul's writing about the humility that Christ himself took on. Is such an amazing concept to us. And in the reading from Matthew's Gospel, this issue comes up again in terms of the question of authority. And rightfully so. If you look in the reading just preceding this scripture, there are Pew Bibles, if you'd like to keep track of where we are in this reading. Chapter 21, verses 23 through 32 is the official reading for today. But if you look just prior to that reading, you'll see that this Jesus, whose precious name gives us joy and comfort, this hope of earth and joy of heaven, has just the day before entered the temple, entered this sacred place of worship, and he has looked around at the tables, looked around at the way things have always been done, looked around at the established families, the members of the temple who were members there before they were born because their parents had been members before them, looked around at the establishment, and he grabbed their pews and he threw them over. And the tables, and he tossed them aside. In this holy place of worship, this is offensive. So much for the joy of heaven. He's taken the establishment and thrown things around, and the elders are seeing this ruckus that he has caused, are in and around the temple, and then there are the kids. The kids who are running around the temple, screaming things like, Hosanna to the King of David, not having been trained to use their inside voices, let alone their church whispers. They were yelling things in this sacred place of worship. And so it's not really surprising that when they see this guy coming back the next day, the elders approach him and say, "Who do you think you are?" Okay, that's probably not what's written in the translation that you're looking at, but it's not all that far off. When he enters the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority do you do these things? Who gave you this authority?" Now, they probably were looking for the name of a teacher, someone they could kind of pass the blame back to, because no other answer would really make any sense. See, as Warren Carter puts it, if Jesus claims his own authority, then he admits that he has no backing. He has no historical, he has no cultural or institutional validation. He appears that he has just acted against God's purposes in some new, disturbing way. If Jesus claims God's authority, then he's a blasphemer. He violates their jurisdiction. He certainly is working against their purposes. So having been asked this question of whose authority, who has given you this authority, Jesus, he's a good rabbi, right? And so in good rabbinic form, Jesus answers their question by asking another question. Did you ever have a teacher who did that? It used to drive me crazy. So Jesus turns the tables on them and says, "I will also ask you a question. If you tell me the answer, then I'll tell you by whose authority I do these things." The question is this: did the baptism of John, remember John the Baptist, baptized Jesus in the Jordan River, did the baptism of John come from heaven or of human origin? And they argued with one another. If we say from heaven, he'll say to us, "Well, then why didn't you believe him?" But if we say it was of human origin, then these people, these crowds all gathered together, they might get a little uppity because they all think John was a prophet and we're kind of afraid of them. So they finally all stopped and said, "We don't know." And Jesus said, "Well, then neither will I tell you by whose authority I do these things." And then he continued to tell them a little story. "What do you think?" He said, "Man had 2 sons, and he went to the first son, and he said, 'Son, go and work in the vineyard today.' And the son answered, 'No, I don't want.' Or, more scripturally, 'I will not.' But later, he changed his mind, and he went. Now the other son, the father went to the second son and said the same thing, and this son said, 'I go, sir.' But the Xbox game was just a little too good, or the sitcom was a little too interesting, and so the son actually did not go. So Jesus asks these elders, which of the 2 did his father's will? And they said,